Imagine you're sitting at a coffee shop, laptop open, and a friend leans over, eyes bright, asking whether that synth you've been eyeballing on the shelf is actually worth the cash. He's got a small home studio, a couple of plugins, but he's missing that one instrument that can do both classic pads and those gritty FM bites without hopping between V.A.S.Ts. He's scared of blowing his budget on a piece of gear that ends up collecting dust. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've been in that exact spot a few times, scrolling through endless spec sheets, watching demo videos that sound pristine, then wondering how the thing really fits into a day-to-day workflow. The Kurzweil K206161 key V.A.S.T synthesizer lands right in that gray area where the promise of everything in one box meets the reality of limited desk space and a need for hand-sync playability. Let's break down what you'll actually experience once you plug it in and help you decide if it's the right fit before you part with your hard-earned cash. First off, the K2061 is built around Kurzweil's Variable Architecture Synthesis Technology, or V.A.S.T for short. In plain English, that means the synth doesn't lock you into a single synthesis method. You get a virtual analog engine, VA1, and a 6-operator FM engine under the same roof. For a 61-key instrument, that's a surprisingly wide palette. If you've ever tried to layer a warm analog brass patch with a metallic FM lead, you'll appreciate that you can do it without routing 2 separate units or loading extra plugins. The 2042 factory programs and 587 multi-combinations act as a massive starter library. I spent a few evenings loading up the presets, and what struck me was the diversity. From the classic Kurzweil K2 series synth-based sounds that many longtime fans reminisce about, to modern evolving textures that feel right at home in a cinematic score. Now, let's talk about the keys. The synth action feel is lighter than a weighted piano keyboard, but it does have aftertouch. In a live setting, that aftertouch can add subtle expression when you press a chord a little deeper, making pads swell or leads bite a fraction harder. In my own recordings, I found that a gentle press could open up a pad's filter, giving it a breathing quality that would otherwise need a separate automation lane in a DAW. The trade-off is that the aftertouch isn't as aggressive as some high-end stage keyboards, so if you're after a very pronounced pressure response for percussive synth leads, you might need to augment it with a controller that offers stronger aftertouch. Polyphony is another real-world factor. The K2061 boasts 256-voice polyphony, which on paper sounds overkill for a 61-key unit. In practice, it means you can stack layers, use the built-in arpeggiator, and still have room for long reverb tails without choking out notes. I built a multi-amber patch that combined a virtual analog bass, a FM bell, and a subtle pad, and even with 8 notes held down, the synth never ran out of voices. That kind of headroom is useful if you like to experiment with dense arrangements on the fly. What about connectivity? The unit ships with standard MIDI and /out through ports and a USB-MIDI interface, so you can either run it as a standalone workstation or integrate it into a DAW as a sound module. Plugging it into a laptop and using it as a MIDI controller felt seamless. The latency was negligible, and the internal program bank loaded instantly when you switched presets. For someone who records at home and doesn't want to juggle multiple audio interfaces, this simplicity is a real strength. However, there are hidden trade-offs that become clear once you step past the initial excitement. The 61-key layout, while convenient for a compact desk, can feel cramped if you're used to an 88-key piano feel or need wide interval leaps for complex chord voicings. I found myself reoctaving certain bass lines simply because the low A wasn't reachable without shifting the entire hand position. If you're a pianist who wants a synth that can also double as a practice instrument, you might end up adding a separate MIDI keyboard just to cover the lower range. Another practical limitation is the depth of editability. V.A.S.T is powerful, but the front panel controls are geared toward quick tweaks rather than deep sound design. You can adjust filters, envelopes, and modulation routings, but digging into the multi-operator FM matrix or creating custom virtual analog oscillators requires navigating through menu layers on a modest screen. In my experience, this made it a bit slower to sculpt a brand new sound compared to a desktop synth that offers a larger visual workspace. If your workflow relies